जय राधा माधव कुंज विहारे जय गोपीजन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारे जय गोपीजन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारे यशोदानंदन व्रज जन रंजन यशोदानंदन व्रज जन रंजन यमुना तीरावनचारी यमुना तीरावनचारी जय राधा माधव कुंज विहारे जय राधा माधव कुंज विहारे जय गोपीजन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारे जय गोपीजन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारे यशोदानंदन व्रज जन रंजन यशोदानंदन व्रज जन रंजन यमुना तीरावनचारी यमुना तीरावनचारी जय राधा माधव कुंज विहारे जय राधा माधव कुंज विहारे जय श्री श्री राधा माधव की श्रील प्रभुपाद की। ओम अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपकदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकं। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरौ श्रीयुतापदकमलं श्रीगुरून् वैष्णवांश्च रघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवं साद्वैतं सर्वभूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधाकृष्णपादान् सगना ललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च। नमो विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रस्थाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्तस्वामिनिति नामिने। नमस्ते सरस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेषशून्यवादी पाश्चात्यदेशतारिणे नमो विष्णुपादाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिसिद्धान्त सरस्वतीनिति नामिने श्रीवार्षभानवी देवी दयिताय कृपाब्धये कृष्णसम्बन्धविज्ञानदायिने प्रभवे नमः। माधुर्योज्ज्वलप्रेमाध्य श्रीरूपानुगभक्तिदा श्रीगौरकरुणाशक्तिविग्रहाय नमोऽस्तुते। नमस्ते गौरवाणी श्रीमुक्तये दीनतारिणे रूपानुगविरुद्ध अपसिद्धान्तद्वान्तहारिणे नमो गौरकिशोराय साक्षात् वैराग्यमूर्तये विप्रलम्बरसाम्भोदे पादाम्बुजायते नमः। नमो भक्तिविनोदाय सच्चिदानन्दनामिने गौरशक्तिस्वरूपाय रूपानुगवरायते गौराविर्भावभूमेस्त्वं नित्यस्तसज्जनप्रिय वैष्णवः सार्वभौम श्रीजगन्नाथाय नमः। वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपासिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। नमो महावदन्याय कृष्णप्रेमप्रदायते कृष्णाय कृष्णचैतन्यनामिने गौरत्तिषे नमः। हे कृष्णकरुणा सिन्धो दीनबन्धो जगत्पते गोपेश गोपिकान्त राधाकान्त नमोऽस्तुते। पञ्चतत्त्वात्मकं कृष्णं भक्तरूपस्वरूपकं भक्तावतारं भक्ताख्यं नमामि भक्तशक्तिकं। हे कृष्ण करुणा सिन्धो दीनबन्धो जगत्पते गोपेश गोपिकान्त राधाकान्त नमोऽस्तुते। जयतां सुरतौ पङ्गोर्मम मन्दमतेर्गति मत्सर्वस्य पदाम्भोजौ राधामदनमोहनौ दिव्याद्वृन्दारण्यकल्पद्रुमणा श्रीमद्रत्नागारसिंहासनस्थौ श्रीमद्राधा श्रीलगोविन्ददेवो पृष्ठालिवे सेव्यमानौ स्मरामि। श्रीमान् रासरसारम्भे वंशीवटतटस्थितः कर्षन्वेणुस्वनैर्गोपीर्गोपीनाथश्रेयस्तु नः। तप्तकाञ्चन गौराङ्गी राधे वृन्दावनेश्वरि वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये। जय श्रीकृष्णचैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानन्द श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौरभक्तवृन्द। हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। Hare Krishna. Today is very auspicious Utthana Ekadashi. So as usual in ISKCON temples we read Srila Prabhupada's Lilamrta. So today we are reading from Srila Prabhupada's Lilamrta, Volume 1, Chapter The War. Currently also a war is going on in Europe. So let us see what's Prabhupada's experience of war. Wherever Abhay went, he seemed to attract the company of his god brothers. Some followers of Sridhar Maharaj, the same Sridhara with whom he had worked in Bombay and whom he had always regarded as a good devotee and scholar, met Abhay at his place on Banerjee line and told this news to Sridhar Maharaj, who was then living at his own ashram in Mayapur. Sridhar Maharaj had disaffiliated himself from the factions of the Gaudiya Math. But as a sannyasi, he was still preaching and was interested in publishing Vaishnava literature. He had wanted to maintain an ashram in Calcutta, so for 20 rupees a month, he rented from Abhay the 4 rooms on the second floor of number 7 above Abhay's chemical laboratory. Now, whenever they came to Calcutta, Sridhar Maharaj, Puri Maharaj, and Bhakti Saranga Maharaj based themselves there, staying in small separate rooms. It became a regular ashram for sannyasis and brahmacharis. And Sridhar Maharaj put a sign out front, Devananda Saraswati Mat. Sridhar Maharaj's establishment of a matha in Mayapur with a branch in Calcutta was his response to the Gaudiya Math's split. So we have seen in 1936, after the departure of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur, the Gaudiya Math started splitting due to internal fights. So then everyone, started establishing their own mats. Prabhupada knows about these things. That's why, even though Prabhupada in 1977 he left, but before leaving, he made a very strong GBC. So even after he left now, how many years? 23, 45 years. Still the ISKCON is one body. So that's very great thing. Prabhupada knows how Kali enters even in the devotee circles and separates them. So he made a very strong GBC body to work together. Like other sannyasis, he had been initiating disciples and preaching, not waiting for the outcome of the litigation. With its continued appeals and counterclaims, Abhay was glad to encourage Sridhar Maharaj and others who joined him at his little ashram. Here, Abhay and Sridhar Maharaj and his followers could remain aloof from the warring factions and together pursue their plans for spreading Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada was supporting his god brothers who established a matha, a center, above his chemical factory, 4 rooms on the 2nd floor. And he was appreciating them, encouraging them to spread Krishna consciousness. The sannyasis cooked in their separate kitchen, performed their puja, and held morning and evening kirtans and lectures. Abhay remained with his family, taking his own meals and performing his own puja. But he often went to discuss Srimad Bhagavatam with Sridhar Maharaj. From his roof, Abhay could see the towering steeple of his spiritual master's building, the Gaudiya Math of Bagh Bazar. Its ownership now contested by bitter factions. So Bagh Bazar was the first Gaudiya Math established by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur in Kolkata. Bagh Bazar, fully marble palace, marble building. But now, because of the bitter factions, fightings in the matha, it is split and someone is taking care of that math. And it seems that is very near to where Abhay was staying. Abhay would often accompany Sridhar Maharaj and his assistants at preaching programs where he would play the mridanga. Who taught mridanga to Prabhupada? His father, name Gaur Mohan De. So he was very expert mridanga player. And when Sridhar Maharaj fell ill, Abhay led the other devotees on preaching engagements, performing kirtan, playing mridanga and giving lectures on the Bhagavatam. Sridhar Maharaj, we did not see Abhay as working very hard for making money, nor did he seem very rich or to have a lot of liquid funds. He was attracted more to the spiritual side of affairs than to his family affairs. He never discussed business prospects with me, whether the business was up or down, or whether he was planning to do this or that. Monetarily, he did not have sufficient funds for giving any to the mission. So Prabhupada, whatever the situation may be in business or family, he was always engaging in Krishna consciousness, supporting them. In fact, in Allahabad, he did a lot, contributed a lot of money for making the Gaudiya Math when he was in Allahabad. So physically or through money, Prabhupada was always serving his spiritual master in spreading Krishna consciousness. So that should be the motive of a disciple. Whatever situation he may be, according to his capacity, he should be always ready to serve his spiritual master. Abhay began to think seriously about writing Vaishnava literature. His spiritual master had seemed very pleased and had told the editor of the Harmonist, whatever he writes, publish it. Business profits, if he could somehow expand them, could go for printing books in English. As his spiritual master had said, if you ever get money, print books. Where did he say this? Radha Kund. Year? 1932. Certainly the Gaudiya Math was not going to do it. Kunja Bihari had sold Bhakti Siddhanta's printing presses to offset his legal expenses. Oh my God. Say a disciple had sold his spiritual master's property. Bhakti Siddhanta Thakur's printing press was sold off so that the legal expenses, because they are fighting, court case is happening. So to pay those expenses, he sold off the printing press. No, Abhay would have to continue on his own, maintaining his business and simultaneously trying to write and publish. And that was also the prescription of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta. It is better that he is living outside your company. When the time comes, he will do everything himself. When Prabhupada Abhay was in Bombay, the Gaudiya Math team there, they said to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati that you should make him the president. Then Bhaktisiddhanta said that no, it is better that he is living outside your company. And when the time comes, he will do everything himself. It was in 1939 that Abhay wrote Introduction to Gita Upanishad. I think this is Gita Sar, what we read, no? Gita Sar. It was a short piece, but it signaled his intention to take on the task of one day translating Bhagavad Gita into English with commentary. Of course, there were already many commentaries in English, but most of them had been written by impersonalists or others who had not delivered the original spirit of the Gita. The spirit of Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, hearing Bhagavad Gita directly from Lord Krishna. What was the spirit of Arjuna on the battle when he was hearing Gita? Arjuna accepted Krishna as his spiritual master, surrendered. Karpanya dosho pahata sabhava prachami tvam dharma sammooda cheta yashreyatan nischitam bruhitan me shishyasteham shadhimam tvam prapannam. Now I am your surrendered disciple. That was his mood. And he was asking questions in a submissive mood. And finally, in the 10th chapter, he accepted Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Param Brahma, Parandhama, Pavitram, Paramam Bhavan, Purusham, Shashvatam, Divyam, Adidevam, Ajam Vibhum, Ahustvam, Rashiyas Sarve, Devarshir, Naradastata, Asito, Devalo Vyasa, Swayam Chaiva, Bravishma. That is the spirit. When you read Bhagavad Gita, you should come to conclusion that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I am his servant. I am supposed to surrender to him. That is the spirit of Arjuna. I was hearing Bhagavad Gita. Abhay knew, however, that he could present Bhagavad Gita in the proper spirit by writing an English commentary based on the teachings of Lord Chaitanya and the disciplic succession. So he began. Whenever he could make time, he would write. Although a strict grammarian could find fault in his English composition, his meaning was always clear. So there could be some grammatical errors, but the meaning was always very clear. In his introduction, Abhay reflected on the time when, as a young schoolboy, he had attended a lecture. Vidya Ratna, the jewel of education. The title of the lecture was Vidya Ratna. The theme of the lecture had been that God does not exist and could not exist. If there were God, he would certainly have appeared on earth to put an end to all religious rivalry. But since God had not obliged man in this way, we should banish all thought of his existence from our minds. The audience, Abhay explained, consisting only of so many young boys, did not delve deeply into the subject matter of the lecture. Yet the majority, impressed by the arguments, carried away lofty ideas of godlessness and thus became agnostics at home. Abhay had not been satisfied with the agnostic conclusion. Jai Shri Shri Radha Madhav ki, Shri Shri Gaur Nitai ki, Shri Shri Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Maharani ki, Srila Prabhupada ki. So this was an atheistic lecture which was going on, and Prabhupada did not like this lecture, this conclusion. Because I had been trained by my father to be engaged in the worship of Sri Sri Radha Govinda, but as a result of Vidya Ratna lecture, I was experiencing some mental conflict between agnosticism and the existence of Godhead. So, this lecture is not about atheism, but this is about agnosticism. What is atheism? What is theism? Theism means God exists. Atheism means God doesn't exist. Agnosticism means you can't say, it is said here, God does not exist and could not exist. You can't prove only, something like that. God does not exist and could not exist. This is what agnosticism is. And by giving reasons, if God is there, why, there is no stoppage of religious rivalry, all these things. And in the current world, many people are agnostics, more than atheists are agnostics. So Prabhupada was feeling very painful after hearing this lecture. Naturally, a devotee feels pain when he hears such blasphemy, such pain, such negative words about God. Naturally, a devotee who has so much love for God, his heart is filled with love for Krishna. So when he heard that, He was feeling mental conflict. He was feeling pain. Later, having heard from his spiritual master, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta, Abhay understood that the personality of Godhead exists in every sphere of activity, but we do not have the eyes to see him. Abhay wrote, even if the Lord personally manifests himself on earth, the quarreling mundaners will not stop their fighting and look upon Godhead or his representative due to ignorance. This is the birthright of the individual soul by the grace of God. So naturally the conditioned soul is envious of God. So even if the God personally comes, they may not accept him because of the enviousness. Like Krishna showed Vishwarupa to Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. But even before the war, when he went for Sandhi to speak with the Kauravas, he also showed this form to Duryodhana. But Duryodhana, because of his demoniac, his envious, he thought it is Maya. And he did not surrender. Bhagavad Gita is the true jewel of education. And in the Gita, Lord Krishna declares to the fighting people on earth, "Here I am, do not quarrel." The agnostic who had spoken of the jewel of education had been blinded by the jewel and therefore could not see and appreciate the personality of Godhead. Thus, he had gone on to convince others to become so-called jewels also. Following his spiritual master, Abhay displayed an aggressive spirit for confronting all opponents of pure theism. In responding to his spiritual master's order to develop into an English preacher, Abhay was not simply making neutral scholarly presentations, he was willing and ready to fight, whether against modern agnostics or Vaishnavism's old traditional enemy, Mayavada impersonalism. Prabhupada is writing Bhakti Swarup, Satswarup Das Goswami Maharaj. He is writing, the traditional enemy of Vaishnavas is Mayavadam. Although few scholars taught the way of surrender to Lord Krishna as espoused in Bhagavad Gita, almost all respected Bhagavad Gita as presenting the essence of all knowledge. The Gita therefore was a perfect vehicle for confronting those who misrepresented God and religion. The Gita was a challenge to the agnostics, apotheosists, anthropomorphists, impersonalists, henotheists, pantheists, and absolute monists. These are all Western words. Some are, pantheist means worshipper of more than one God. They say all gods is one. You can worship any God, you can go same place. Absolute monist, I think they are Buddhist, monist, monism. Impersonalists, Mayavadis, anthropomorphists, who consider God to be a normal human. They put human qualities to God. Agnostics, who says that could not exist. He says he can't prove. That's what he says. You can't prove, and he argues like that. Social workers. Although there were, actually, if you want to know all these things, there is a book called Beyond Illusion and Doubt. How many of you read this book? Beyond Illusion and Doubt. How many of you distributed this book? Everyone? But how many you read this book? You read this book, it is out of the mind. It is so technical. It has actually its starting initial name was didactic spiritualism. Its name was didactic spiritualism, the name of the book. And then it's very complex to read also. So therefore it changed to Beyond Illusion and Doubt. So in that, actually it is a book about Prabhupada discussing with his disciples about different philosophers. Very nice book. You should read that book. You will actually get a clear understanding of all these Western philosophers like Socrates, Dr. Freud. Prabhupada uses these names. Freud and Carl Jung. Not Karl Marx is communism. Plato. Yeah. So all these Western philosophers, you will get a clear understanding of what is their philosophy. So actually, it is said how the Kamalochan Prabhu says that the 6 systems of philosophy we have. Nyaya, what are the 6 systems? Nyaya, Sankhya, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Sankhya, Yoga, Karma Mimamsa and Uttara Mimamsa. There are 6 systems of philosophy. So these 6 systems of philosophy are organized confusions. They are misrepresentation of the absolute truth, but they are in a very organized way. They misrepresented the absolute truth. So they are all atheistic. They don't accept the authority of the Supreme, even though they are considered to be Vedic. But even within Vedic, they accept Vedas, but they don't accept the absolute truth. In the garb of Vedism, they are atheist. So they are organized confusions. And these philosophers, Socrates and Plato, Carl Jung, all they are unorganized confusions. They don't accept supreme authority. They speak something in the air they speak. They only don't know what they speak. So they are unorganized confusions. But the other things are organized way of, atheism. So you can learn a lot about these. Prabhupada discussing with his disciples, they ask about, okay, Prabhupada, what about this, what about this? And Prabhupada also gives a lot of similarities between their philosophy and ours. But many times he cuts off also and defeats those philosophies. So you can learn there. I think there are some 15, 16 philosophers' names are there. Although there were already more than 600 commentaries on Bhagavad Gita, they had been written by persons with an inner hatred for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And therefore they were imperfect. Such envious persons, Abhay wrote, have no entrance into the real meaning of Bhagavad Gita, in as much as a fly cannot enter into the covered jar of honey. So these people are compared to a fly which cannot enter into a jar of honey which is closed. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur says this. What is this? No, it is like licking the honey bottle outside. What you will get? You can't get any. You just get a feeling of, tasting honey, but you don't get you are not going to really relish the honey. So these philosophers are like that. They try to relish Bhagavad Gita in that way. Abhay described Indian culture as an almost impassable ocean due to its depth of thought and apparent mixtures of conclusions. But in this book, Abhay declared, I will establish that Krishna is the absolute personality of Godhead, by referring to the available records of scriptures, which are the recorded history of Indian culture and thought. So, Indian culture, that means the Vedic texts are like ocean, like samundar, oceanic, so deep and wide, so many theories, so many conclusions, so many doctrines, lot of things are there. But Prabhupada, Abhay, declaring that I will establish that Krishna is the absolute personality of Godhead by referring to the available records of scriptures, which are the recorded history of Indian culture and thought. Actually, it is only Prabhupada who very clearly established that Krishna is the Supreme Personality. Very clear. Any new person, if they read Bhagavad Gita or any book of Prabhupada, he will every page 10 times he will read, Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Like Prabhupada, he calls that small girl Saraswati. Who is Krishna? Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. She knows, small girl, she can tell. The sannyasis at 7 Banerjee line were impressed by the scope of Abhay's thought and intentions. As it was customary to award a title to an especially worthy Vaishnava according to his qualities, Bhakti Saranga Goswami wanted to confer upon Abhay the title Bhakti Siddhanta. Sridhar Maharaj, however, thought it inappropriate to give Abhay the same title as their spiritual master. So, seeing the scholarship of Abhay, the God brothers wanted to give him a title. And one God brother, Bhakti Saranga Goswami, was thinking of giving Bhakti Siddhanta name. But Sridhar Maharaj thought it inappropriate because it's Guru's name. How can a disciple keep the same name? And he asked that Abhay's title be changed to Bhakti Vedanta. So, Bhakti Vedanta, the name was given by Sridhar Maharaj. You should remember this. Bhakti means devotion and Vedanta meaning the end of knowledge. Abhay was grateful. The title combined the devotion of religion and with the scholarship of the most rigorous philosophy as passed down by the scholarly followers of Lord Chaitanya. He appreciated the sincere gesture of his God brothers and accepted the title as a further commitment to his spiritual path of preaching Krishna consciousness. Abhay continued regularly associating with Sridhar Maharaj and discussing with him Srimad Bhagavatam. Abhay encouraged him to preach widely, although Sridhar Maharaj was admittedly more the scholar and rather shy about going out and preaching. On several occasions, Abhay tried to convince Sridhar Maharaj to go with him and charge Gandhi and Nehru as to why they were not following the principles of Bhagavad Gita. Another fruit of the spiritual association at 7 Banerjee line was a book called Prapanna Jivanamrita. Compiled by Sridhar Maharaj, a collection of verses from various Vaishnava scriptures, including excerpts from the works of Rupa Goswami. It was divided into 6 chapters according to the 6 divisions of surrender. Prapanna means surrender. So the 6 divisions of surrender. What are the 6 divisions of surrender? What are the 6 divisions of surrender? Anukulasya, Sankalpam, Pratikulasya, Varjanam. Then Rakshishyatiti Vishwasho Goptrutve Varanam Tatha Atmanikshepa Karpanye Shadvida Sharanagati. Abhay, along with the sannyasis of the Devananda Saraswati Mutt, financed the publication. Which book? Prapanna Jivanamrta. Thus, it was published as a joint effort by friends. September 3, 1939. Lord Linlithgow, Viceroy of India, announced that India was at war with Germany. Thus, England swept India into the war. Without consulting any Indians, all the independence-minded India certainly resented such a show of foreign control. There were mixed feelings about the war. India wanted independence, yet she sympathized with the Allied cause against fascism in the West and feared an invasion by Imperial Japan in the East. Since you dislike the British so violently, one author asked a typical New Delhi student of the day, would you want Japan to invade and conquer India? Student, no. But we Indians pray that God may give the British enough strength to stand up under the blows they deserve. So on one side, India, they don't want Japan to attack and take control of India. And other hand, they don't want Britishers to engage us in the war. Although at the outbreak of the war, India had only 175,000 men in her armed forces. The British managed to increase the number of Indian soldiers to 2 million. 2 million, that means 20 lakhs. There was no draft, but the British sent recruiting agents all over India, especially in the Punjab, where military service seemed an attractive offer to the local poor. Even now Punjabis are more in the military. The Punjabis proved good fighters, whereas Bengalis enlisted as officers, doctors, contractors and clerks. So Punjabis, Nepalis, they are very Kshatriya spirit. Prabhupada says in lecture, Kshatriya spirit. Whereas Bengalis, it's written officers, doctors, contractors and clerks. But Bengalis are also very famous poets are there. Those days, Rabindranath Tagore, Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, all great, it's a land of great poets, literary art, literature, singers. Bengal, practically everyone is a singer in Bengal. They are fond of singing. Indian soldiers were dispatched to battlefields in Egypt, Iraq, Syria, Persia, Malaya, Burma and Assam. While the British were attempting to mobilize Indians for the war, the Indian nationalist movement, which had continued off and on for more than 20 years, became very active. So members of the Congress party refused to cooperate with the war effort and demanded guaranteed independence for India. Some thought that since England had her hands full with Germany, the time was ripe to revolt and gain independence by force. Gandhi's position had been one of unconditional pacifism, and he had opposed the idea of Indians taking up arms even to defend India. But by 1942, he had become more inimical and had reduced his policy towards the British to a simple, unequivocal quit India. Thousands of Indians responded by chanting slogans in the street and even by tearing up the railway lines. Abhay's militant former schoolmate Subhash Chandra Bose fought against the British in his own way. He had approached Hitler in Germany and gotten him to agree that when the Germans captured Indian soldiers, Germany would return them to Bose, who would maintain them in his nationalist army. With this army, Bose planned to return to India and drive the British from Indian soil. But dissatisfied with his progress in Germany, Bose made a similar agreement with Tojo in Japan, and soon thousands of Gurkhas and Sikhs, the best fighters in the Indian army, had defected from the British army to join Bose's freedom fighters in Singapore. Bose began to prepare his army to invade India from the north. Then in 1943, the British found that the Japanese, who had already taken Burma, were at the doors of India, approaching Bengal. By their tactic known as the denial policy, the British sank many Indian boats carrying food and destroyed large rice crops, fearing that they would fall into the hands of the enemy. This left local Indians starving and without the boats they needed for trade. The famine that ensued was the worst that had hit Bengal in 150 years. The government removed all control of food costs, and those who could not afford to buy at the skyrocketing prices died in the streets of Calcutta. Srila Prabhupada, I have got experience. The government created artificial famine. The war was going on, so Mr. Churchill's policy was to keep the people in scarcity so they will volunteer to become soldier. So this policy was executed. Big men, they collected the rice. Rice was selling at 6 rupees per mound. All of a sudden it became to 50 rupees per mound. I was in the grocer shop purchasing and all of a sudden the grocer said, No, I am not going to sell anymore. At that moment the price was 6 rupees per mound, so suddenly he was not going to sell. A few hours later I went back to purchase and the rice had gone up to 50 rupees per mound. The government appointed agents began to purchase the rice and other commodities which are daily necessities. They can offer any price because the currency is in their hands. They can print so-called papers, $100 and pay. A man becomes satisfied thinking, oh, I have $100, but it is a piece of paper. That was the policy. You have no money, no rice. So another avenue is open. Yes, you become a soldier. You get so much money. People out of poverty would go there. I have seen it. No rice was available in the market and people were hungry. They were dying. So in this way, the governments, they forcefully, they take the citizens. They don't know how to catch a weapon, how to fire also. But still the government forces them. Just like even in 1960s, in the Vietnam War, America was pushing all the young people to join the war. But those who have that fighting mentality, they go. Like we have 4 varnas, Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra. You should have Kshatriya spirit to fight. A Brahmana or Vaishya or, if you give to a Vaishya a gun, he will think of selling it and make money. If you give to a Brahmana, he will study the gun, how many bullets are there inside, how much speed, and he will study about it. So, one who has Kshatriya spirit, he can fight. But the government is pushing, go, fight, otherwise you'll no food. Artificial famine government creates. So in Kali Yuga, kings are demoniac. Even now in the war in Ukraine and Russia, They are stopping the food supply. The ships which carry food, oil, they are stopping that ships. So that means lakhs of people who are supposed to get that grains, they will not get that. So in few months, we don't know what will happen. Abhay managed to purchase just enough. That's why Prabhupada, Varnashrama, grow your own food, grow your own cloth, make your own cloth, self-sustained communities. Abhay managed to purchase just enough for his own family to survive, but he saw the beggar population increase by the hundreds. Month after month, he saw the footpaths and open spaces congested with beggars, cooking their food on improvised stoves and sleeping in the open or beneath the trees. He saw starving children rummaging in the dustbins for a morsel of food. From there, it was but a step to fighting with the dogs for a share of the garbage. Actually, it is a complete sin committed by these Britishers that India went into such poverty. And once it goes into that stage, again to come back to a normal stage, it takes so many decades. This is in 1939, 1940s. So India was considered a poor country even till 1980, 90s also. India was considered as a poor country. From there, it was but a step to fighting with the dogs for a share of the garbage, and this also became a familiar sight in the Calcutta streets. The British had little time to spare from their war efforts, and they worked only to save those lives essential for the fight. For the common people, the empire's prescription was uniform and simple: starvation. Srila Prabhupada. One American gentleman was present at that time. He remarked, "People are starving in this way. In our country there would have been revolution. Yet, yes, but the people of India are so trained that in spite of artificial famine, they did not commit theft, stealing others' property. People were dying, still they thought, all right, God has given." That was the basic principle of Vedic civilization. Abhay knew that under the laws of nature there was no scarcity. By God's arrangement, the earth could produce enough food. The trouble was man's greed. There is no scarcity in the world. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had said, the only scarcity is of Krishna consciousness. Certainly there is no scarcity. When you go out, go on the highway, you see hundreds and thousands of hectares of land open. So much food can be grown. Actually, there won't be any scarcity of food. But people had given up agriculture. Now it's all about producing nuts and bolts, producing metals. And this was how Abhay saw the 1943 famine. Now more than ever, this spiritual vision was relevant. Krishna consciousness was the prime necessity. How else could man be checked from his evil propensities to become greedy, hoard, make war, and thus create misery for millions? He had seen the heinous activities of the British in India. Their cutting off the thumbs of the weavers so that Indian-made cotton goods could not compete with the foreign-made cloth. So demoniac. Their shooting down of unarmed, innocent citizens, their creating artificial famine, their propagating the myth that Indian civilization was primitive. Still, he did not believe that an independent Indian government would necessarily be an improvement. Unless the leadership was Krishna conscious, and neither Gandhi nor Subhash Chandra Bose was, then the government would be able to provide no real solutions. Only stopgap measures. Without obedience to the laws of God as expressed by the scriptures and sages, governments would only increase human suffering. Actually, if we see the history, India is the only country where so much exploitation, so much destruction from other countries, other religions, happened. So much of attacks, looting, killing, stealing. Even after all these things, first it started by Muslims. The Muslims attacked, they broke some thousands of temples, and they killed the Brahmanas. Then Britishers, they spoiled the Vedic culture, our Gurukul system. Even after doing so much of destruction, it is the Sanatan Dharma is so strong, so powerful that it is still continued. It is still being continued even till today. Then Calcutta was bombed day after day. The bombing was concentrated in specific areas such as the Attapur port facility and Shama Bazaar in North Calcutta, very near Abhay's home at Sitakanta Banerjee Line. American planes had been leaving from airfields near Calcutta for targets in China and Japan. So the air raids on Calcutta seemed an inevitable retaliation. It was the Japanese striking back. Or was it, some said it was the forces of Subhash Chandra Bose, since the bombs fell mostly in the European quarter. But for the people of Calcutta, it made little difference who was attacking. After the first bombing, people evacuated the city. Blackouts were imposed. And at night, the entire city was dark. No power. Srila Prabhupada. Calcutta became vacant. Perhaps only myself and a few others remained. I sent my sons to Navadip. Of course, my daughter was married. My wife refused to go out of Calcutta. She said, I will be bombed, but I will not go. So I had to remain in Calcutta. I have seen bombing in Calcutta all night. I was just eating when there was the siren. So arrangement was that in your house would be the better shelter room. I was hungry, so I first finished eating. Then I went to the room and the bombing began. Chee! Kyam! I was thinking that this was also Krishna in another form, but that form was not very lovable. Srila Prabhupada ki. Srila Prabhupada Lilamrta ki. Any questions? Srila Prabhupada ki jai.